The wind carried the faint scent of pine and cold as Margaret Holloway, 65 years old, lit the single oil lamp on her cabin table. Its soft glow flickered across the wooden walls, touching the old photographs, the hand-stitched quilts, and the quiet corners where memories lived deeper than shadows. Outside, snow drifted slowly across the yard, settling on the fence posts like white lace. Margaret wrapped her wool shawl tightly around her shoulders. Winter nights had always been long, but they felt longer now, with no voice but the fire to keep her company. She thought she knew every silence this cabin could hold, until she heard the sound of wagon wheels crunching through the snow. At first, she believed it must be a traveler stopping for warmth. No one else came this far into the hills. But when she stepped onto the porch, the oil lamp trembling in her hand, she froze. A man stepped down from the wagon. Older now, silver hair, broad shoulders she had fallen against once when she was young. The man she rejected in her 20s, the man she never truly forgot, stood before her after 4 decades of silence. "Margaret," he whispered, his breath turning to mist, "please, hear me out this time." And Margaret's world shifted. The winter wind whistled across the foothills of Maple Hollow, carrying with it the sharp bite of the late-year cold and the soft hiss of drifting snow. The small frontier town, little more than a scatter of wooden homes, a livery, a modest church, and a general store, lay quiet under the faded gold of a dying afternoon. Inside a weathered cabin perched on a lone rise above the hollow, Margaret Holloway, 65 years old, moved slowly across the wooden floorboards as she swept the day's dust toward the open door. Her movements were steady but gentle, as though each sweep carried echoes of a life she once imagined and never lived. Her wool shawl, worn soft with age, wrapped around her shoulders, warming her thin frame. Her gray hair, braided carefully each morning, glimmered faintly in the firelight as the last rays of sunlight slipped across the cabin walls. Margaret worked quietly, her tired hands knowing the motions well. The cabin was humble, one main room with a fireplace, a modest bed in the corner, shelves holding folded linens, a rocking chair by the window, and a table where she kept a small wooden box filled with old letters she never mailed. Letters she wrote, but never sent. Letters to people who no longer lived in her world. Some letters filled with regret. Some with apologies. Some with truths she was too afraid to speak. But one letter in that box, tucked deep at the bottom, held the memory she never spoke of, the one memory she had buried beneath 40 years of silence. A memory named James Whitford, the man she once loved, the man she rejected, the man who left town after she refused him and never returned. Margaret touched the edge of the wooden box now, lightly, as if greeting an old wound. She lifted the lid a fraction, seeing the letters inside, handwritten in ink that had faded to soft brown. Then she closed the box again. Some doors, she believed, were meant to stay closed. The fire crackled softly. Outside, a horse whinnied in the distance. Margaret paused, listening, then shook her head. Likely it was Tomlinson's roan mare from the next property down the hill. She reached for the kettle above the fire to pour herself evening tea when, crunch. The unmistakable sound of wagon wheels rolling over thick snow cut through the stillness. Margaret froze. No one visited her at dusk. Few visited even in daylight. And travelers passing by never came down her long path. The cabin sat too far from the road, too far from convenience, too far from others' business. She lifted her head slowly. Listened. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Hoofbeats joined the wheels. Slow, deliberate, and heavy. A stranger's tread. Margaret's heart tightened. Memories of the old frontier days, when bandits roamed and travelers sought shelter during storms, flickered at the edge of her mind. She glanced toward the rifle mounted above the fireplace, but did not reach for it. Instead, she set the kettle down gently and walked toward the door. Her hand trembled on the latch. The late afternoon light cast the world in shades of gold and cold. She stepped onto the porch and froze in place. A wagon, dusty from long travel, pulled by a tired chestnut horse, creaked its way up her snow-covered path. A single man drove it, broad shoulders beneath a heavy wool coat, gray hair tucked beneath a weather-beaten hat, a straight, steady posture. Her breath caught. No, it couldn't be. It couldn't. The wagon came to a slow stop. The man climbed down, boots sinking into the snow. He removed his hat, revealing a lined face warmed by the glow of the setting sun. A face she had not seen since 1854. "Margaret," he said softly, breath turning to mist. His voice, older, deeper, but unmistakable, carried across the cold air and struck her like a memory she had tried to forget. She gripped the porch railing to steady her knees. "James?" she whispered. He nodded, eyes soft and searching. "It's me." Margaret's breath trembled out of her. The world seemed to tilt, the sky expanding around her all at once. "You're supposed to be in Missouri," she murmured. "I heard you settled there. I heard you married." James's eyes lowered. Not everything you heard was true. Margaret swallowed hard. "What are you doing here after all these years?" James stepped closer, the snow crunching beneath his boots. "I came because, for most of my life, I've carried something I should have said a long time ago." His voice shook slightly. "And if I don't speak it now, I fear I never will." Margaret's throat tightened. She felt the cold seep through her shawl, through her bones, through the place inside her she had kept locked for decades. "James," she whispered, "why now? After so long." He looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen since she was 22. "Because pain ages. Because regret lingers. Because some stories never end. They simply wait for courage." But he only said, "Because I heard you lost your husband, and I realized the world can change in a breath. And if I left this unsaid, if I left you with nothing but memories of the past, then I would never find peace." Margaret's eyes glimmered with a pain she had buried deep. "What is it you want to say?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James took a slow, deliberate step forward. The wind stilled. The world quieted. The fire inside the cabin flickered silently. He looked at her with a grief that had lived for 40 years. "I never stopped loving you." Margaret's breath broke. The snow fell quietly around them. Her hand pressed tightly against the porch railing, as if bracing against the past rising to swallow her. "I came," he continued softly, "to ask if you ever thought of me, even once." Margaret's voice trembled. "I thought of you more than you could ever know." James exhaled, a long-held breath releasing. "Then let me speak. And if you wish, I'll leave at dawn. But first," his voice grew quiet, almost fragile. "First, let me tell you why I left after you rejected me. Let me tell you what I carried all these years." Margaret's pulse fluttered painfully. "James," she whispered, "what happened?" But before he could answer, the horse behind him jerked its head, snorting sharply, sensing something down the trail. James turned slightly, and Margaret suddenly noticed another set of wagon tracks behind his. Fresh, close, heading toward her cabin. Her heart dropped. "James, were you followed?" she whispered. He stiffened, eyes narrowing toward the drifting snow. Then, from the ridge behind her cabin came the faint, distant sound of a second wagon. A sound drifting closer. James inhaled sharply. "Oh no," Margaret grabbed his arm. "James, what's wrong?" He turned to her, eyes full of fear. "Margaret, someone else knows I came to find you." Before she could speak, the wind carried the sound again. Crunch, 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 growing closer, heavier, dangerous. James stepped onto the porch beside her, jaw tensed, eyes fixed on the ridge. He whispered, "Margaret, I didn't come alone." The wind carried the low groan of wagon wheels across the ridge, slow, heavy, and unmistakably deliberate. Margaret stood frozen on the porch, her fingers digging into the wooden railing, her heart pounding painfully against her ribs. Behind her, the warm glow of her cabin flickered across the snow. Before her, James Whitford, older now, lined with years of living she never saw, stepped closer, placing himself between her and the encroaching sound. "James," Margaret whispered, "who is out there?" He didn't answer immediately. His breath came in a heavy cloud as he studied the darkening ridge. The sun had slipped behind the mountains, leaving the world in pale dusk. The wagon wheels slowed. Stopped. Silence. Margaret looked up at James, fear filling her eyes. "Tell me," she whispered. "Tell me who followed you." James exhaled, the sound full of regret. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he murmured. "I came alone. I truly did. But someone must have recognized my wagon on the road." Margaret stepped back, gripping her shawl tight. "Recognized you? After 40 years?" James nodded grimly. "There are some men who don't forget debts, Margaret." She stared at him, breath trembling. "What kind of debts?" He turned to her, his eyes soft but full of old sorrow. "The kind of man can't outrun." Before Margaret could respond, a sharp metallic click echoed from the ridge. A lantern flared to life. A dim yellow glow revealed a figure atop the second wagon, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a heavy coat, face hidden beneath the brim of a hat. The man lifted the lantern higher. "Whitford," he shouted, voice carrying through the cold. "You can't hide from me." Margaret flinched. James stiffened, jaw clenched. "Not tonight," he muttered, more to himself than her. Margaret grabbed his sleeve. "James, who is he?" James swallowed hard. "His name is Elias Crow." The name struck something in Margaret's memory. Stories of a horse trader gone rogue, a man rumored to run debts, threats, and backwoods justice. A man known for carrying grudges longer than most folks lived. Margaret gasped. "You, James, did you owe him money?" James shook his head sharply. "No, not money." He hesitated. "Something worse." The lantern on the ridge swung wildly as the figure paced beside his wagon. "You left me to suffer, Whitford," Crow shouted. "This time I'll make sure you face what you ran from." Margaret's pulse hammered. James turned to her, voice soft. "I never wanted danger anywhere near you. I came to give you the truth, not bring trouble to your door." Margaret swallowed. "James, what did you do?" He looked down, shoulders sagging beneath the weight of the past. "Elias and I worked together years ago. Freight hauling. Dangerous routes. Long nights. One trip went bad." Margaret felt the cold seep straight into her bones. "What happened?" she whispered. James rubbed a hand over his brow. "A storm hit. We were carrying medicine to a settlement near the river. The wagon overturned. The horse panicked. I barely pulled myself out. Elias didn't." He paused. "He lost the use of his right leg that night." Margaret covered her mouth. "James, he blamed me." James said I abandoned him when I should have saved him. "Truth is, I tried. God knows I tried. But the river was rising. And if I'd stayed, we both would have died." A heavy silence fell. Margaret touched his arm gently. "You survived," she said softly. He nodded. "And he survived too. But he grew bitter. Told everyone I left him on purpose. Said I ruined his life." Margaret closed her eyes. "And he has spent all these years hunting. You." James's voice lowered. "He's been tracking me since last spring. I stayed ahead of him until now." The lantern on the ridge shifted again. Crow's voice rose. "Come on out, Whitford. I ain't riding back down this mountain until we settle this." James turned to Margaret. "I must leave," he said firmly. "If he sees you, if he knows you're part of this, he'll use you to get to me." Margaret shook her head fiercely. "No, you're not running alone again." James stepped back onto the snow. "I won't drag you into my troubles, Margaret. Not after all this time. Not after everything you already lost." She felt tears sting her eyes. "You left 40 years ago because I said no. Not because I didn't love you. Not because I didn't care. Because I wasn't ready." He looked at her with an ache that went deeper than age. "I know," he whispered. Margaret took a shaky breath. "And I won't let you leave again without me understanding the whole truth." James opened his mouth to speak. A sudden sharp crack split the air. A gunshot. Margaret gasped. James jerked backward as the snow near his boot exploded upward. A hole blasted clean through the white drift. Crow's voice thundered through the cold. "I warned you, Whitford. Next one doesn't miss." James grabbed Margaret's shoulders. "Get inside," he commanded, pushing her toward the door. "No," Margaret cried, clinging to him. "You're bleeding. I'm not hit," he said quickly, though his breath trembled. "But he'll shoot again." Margaret looked into his eyes. The fear there wasn't for himself. It was for her. Crow shouted again. "Come out and face me like a man." James leaned close, whispering urgently. "Margaret, there's something I must tell you. Something I came all this way to say." She shook her head, tears slipping free. "Not now. Not here." But he held her face gently in both hands, his palms rough and warm. His voice broke. "Margaret, I didn't leave town because you rejected me." She stared at him, breath gone. He shook his head, eyes glistening. "I left because you were in danger." Her heart lurched. "What?" "I'll explain inside. But understand this, what happened back then, it wasn't your fault. It was mine, and I carried the truth all these years." Another shot tore through the evening. This time it hit the porch post inches from Margaret's head. James pulled her into his arms to shield her. "Margaret, inside. Now." Crow's footsteps crunched down the ridge path, drawing closer. James pushed Margaret through the cabin door. But just as he stepped in behind her, a shadow crossed the porch. A cold voice drawled. "Whitford, you run from me again, and I'll put the next bullet straight through the woman." Margaret's breath caught. James froze. "Elias," he said quietly, "don't do this." "Oh, I intend to," Crow replied, stepping onto the porch with gun drawn. The lantern cast long, ugly shadows behind him. His hat brim lifted enough for Margaret to see his scar, twisted along his jawline like a rope burn. "One of us ends tonight." Margaret shook her head, tears falling. "No, please," Crow aimed. James stepped in front of her, and Crow's cold smile widened. "I knew I'd find your weakness," he said softly, "and now I have." Margaret clutched James's coat, fear flooding her. James whispered, "Margaret, whatever you do, don't let go of me." She tightened her grip. Crow cocked the gun. The hammer clicked, sharp and final. Then, a second shadow stepped out from behind the porch railing. A voice Margaret recognized instantly. A voice that should not have been there, spoke from the darkness. "Elias Crow, put the gun down." Margaret's heart stopped. She whispered, "No, it can't be." James turned slowly, eyes wide in shock. Because standing in a lantern glow, half-hidden, snow dusting his shoulders, was a man Margaret believed. Dead for 10 years. Her husband. For a long, breathless moment, the world seemed to freeze. The snow fell softer. The wind quieted to a hush. Even Crow's lifted gun seemed suspended in the air, its hammer cocked and ready. Because the man stepping from the shadows, the man with frost on his shoulders and 10 years of death behind his name, was unmistakably Samuel Holloway, Margaret's husband. His hair, once chestnut, now silvered. His shoulders narrower than she remembered. His face lined by storms she had never witnessed. But his eyes, those steady, sharp eyes, were the same. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. "Samuel," she breathed, her voice breaking like thin ice. James stood between her and Crow, stunned into stillness. Crow's eyes widened as he shifted focus between the two men. Well, he sneered. "Looks like Whitford ain't the only surprise on this mountain." Samuel stepped forward, long coat brushing against the porch floorboards. His voice was low, steady, but edged with a thunder Margaret had never heard from him before. "Put the gun down, Elias." Crow scoffed. "Move aside, Holloway. This ain't your fight." Samuel's gaze hardened. "You're pointing that pistol toward my wife. That makes it my fight." Wife. The word hit Margaret like a blow. She hadn't heard it in 10 years. She hadn't imagined she ever would again. James turned his head slightly, his breath unsteady, not from cold, but something far more painful. Margaret could feel his heart drop through the silence. Samuel continued moving forward, boots crunching against the snow. "You fire that weapon," he said calmly, "and I swear you won't leave this mountain standing." Crow smirked. Bold words for a dead man. A muscle twitched along Samuel's jaw. "I'm not dead," he said. "I just had the sense to stay away from men like you." Margaret's knees weakened. 10 years. 10 long years she believed Samuel gone, drowned in a river accident, according to the sheriff's final report. Her grief had been long, heavy, slow like winter creeping across the ground. Why? Why had he lived without telling her? Crow raised the gun again, this time aiming between James and Samuel. What a pretty picture, he growled. 2 men, 1 woman, and a heap of lies between all 3. James stepped in front of Margaret again, voice tight. Don't pull that trigger, Elias. Oh, I will, Crow whispered, unless I get what I came for. Samuel's voice darkened. You came for vengeance, Crow. You always do. Crow chuckled bitterly. Not vengeance, Holloway. Justice. Margaret's trembling hands gripped James's coat. This was spiraling beyond anything she could bear. Then Samuel lifted something from his coat, a folded piece of paper, edges worn. He held it up. You want justice? He said. Then read this, Elias. Crow narrowed his eyes. I ain't reading nothing from a ghost. You will read it, Samuel snapped, because it's the reason your brother died. The wind fell dead. Margaret's heart lurched painfully. Crow's fingers tightened on the pistol. You best explain that, he growled. James's voice cracked. Samuel, no. Crow's eye shot toward him. You knew? All this time. James swallowed hard. Yes. Margaret felt her breath seize. James, what is he talking about? His eyes lowered. Elias's brother died in that river accident. The same night Samuel disappeared. Margaret stared at him. James, Samuel fell in that river. He drowned. Everyone searched for him. No, Samuel said quietly. Margaret turned to him, the world tilting. I didn't fall. Crow's chest heaved. Then who put my brother in that water? Samuel met his eyes. Your brother and I were hauling goods together. The bridge beam cracked. He grabbed the rope wrong. He slipped. I reached for him, but the current pulled him under. By the time I climbed down the bank, he was gone. Crow's grip tightened. Liar. Samuel didn't move. I dove in after him. Twice. Nearly died myself. But I found only his coat, snagged on the branch. Crow's face crumpled. Not with anger, but with grief so sharp it cut through the cold. Margaret felt her heart break for all of them. Samuel continued. I only survived because the current threw me against the rocks downriver. A trapper found me half-conscious. I didn't remember my name for 2 months. Margaret gasped. Samuel, all this time, you were alive and hurt. He nodded, voice trembling. When I finally came to, when memories returned, I tried to come home, but word was that Crow was hunting me. Thought I killed his brother. Thought I ran. Crow's jaw clenched. You did run. No, Samuel Guispert. I hid, because I wanted to protect Margaret. Margaret felt the cold slip into her bones. Protect me? Samuel turned to her. Elias made threats. Said if he didn't get justice, he'd come for everything I ever cared for. Crow's face darkened. I said I wanted the truth. And I believed you'd hurt her, Samuel said softly. So I stayed away, far enough to keep her safe, close enough to watch over her. James inhaled sharply. So that's why you disappeared. Margaret felt something crack inside her. You watched me grieve, she whispered, voice breaking. You watched me bury an empty coffin, and you stayed silent. Samuel's eyes filled. I had no choice. She stepped back. Yes, she said, trembling. You did. The lantern flickered across Samuel's face, revealing the sorrow carved into every line. Crow's hand lowered slightly. You're telling me my brother's death wasn't your fault? No, Samuel said. It was an accident. But you blame me so hard. I thought you'd kill Margaret to punish me. Crow's jaw trembled. Get over here, he snapped, motioning Samuel forward. Give me that letter. Margaret grabbed Samuel's sleeve. No, he'll shoot you. Samuel gave her a gentle, heartbreaking smile. He deserves the truth, too. He stepped down from the porch slowly, boots crunching softly in the snow. He held the paper out to Crow. Crow snatched it, eyes scanning the trembling ink. Margaret held her breath. James clenched his fists, every muscle taut. Samuel stood still, waiting. At last, Crow lowered the paper. His voice cracked. That's my brother's handwriting. James whispered. I told you. Crow looked up, eyes shining with something Margaret had never seen in him. Pain, regret, and maybe understanding. Crow's arm felt at his side, gun loosening. Margaret let out a shaky breath of relief. But then, from the ridge above them, another wagon appeared. Another lantern. Another shout. Crow, did you find Whitford? Crow's eyes widened. No, They followed me. Two more men rode down the slope, armed, rough-faced, ready for violence. And they didn't know the truth. The leader raised his rifle. There he is. Whitford, get him. James grabbed Margaret instinctively. Crow spun. No, stop. Too late. The rifle fired. James flinched. Margaret screamed. And Samuel collapsed to his knees in the snow. A bloom of red spread across his coat. He had stepped in front of the bullet. For her. For all of them. Margaret dropped beside him, shaking, sobbing. Samuel, Samuel, stay with me. James knelt furiously beside her, eyes blazing with grief and panic. Crow turned, bellowing at his men. Stop! Don't shoot again! But the Ridgemen lifted their rifles to fire again, and James realized they were aiming at Margaret this time. Samuel Holloway fell into the snow with a heavy, shuddering gasp, his body collapsing like a man whose last strength had finally slipped through his fingers. Margaret's cry tore through the cold evening. No, no, Samuel, stay with me. She knelt beside him, hands trembling violently as they pressed against the spreading red on his coat. The snow beneath him turned crimson, a stark contrast against the fading daylight. James knelt beside her, breathing hard. He's hit deep, James said. We need to stop the bleeding. Samuel winced, his breath a thin, fragile fog. Margaret, he whispered, his voice, gentle, breaking, warm, even in pain, shattered her heart. Crow spun toward the two men charging down the ridge, their rifles raised. Stop firing, he roared. But they didn't listen. One shouted back, You had your chance, Crow. He killed your brother. Now we finish him. The second man pointed directly at Margaret. And the woman's a witness. James lunged forward. No. Crow stepped between them, raising both arms wide. She's innocent, and Whitford ain't the killer. We've been wrong. But rage had deafened the Ridgemen. The leader cocked his rifle again. Move, Crow. I won't. His voice cracked with something Margaret didn't expect. Conviction. Regret. A man who finally knew the truth. But the Ridgemen shifted angles, circling around him. One aimed again, straight at Margaret. James moved without thinking. He grabbed Margaret, pulling her close, shielding her with his own body. The rifle barrel glinted in the lantern light. No, Margaret whispered, breast trembling. Not again. Not another man dying for me. Samuel coughed violently, trying to sit up. Don't hurt her, Margaret sobbed. Samuel, lie still, please. But Samuel pushed her hand weakly away. He turned his head, forcing himself to look at James. Whitford, he gasped. James leaned in. I'm here. Samuel's eyes burned with determination. You keep her safe. James swallowed hard. I will. Samuel nodded once, a fragile motion. Then Crow's voice broke through. Everyone get down. But the Ridgemen were already firing. James grabbed Margaret and pulled her back behind the fallen wagon. A bullet splintered the wooden wheel inches from James's head. Another shot cracked the air. Crow tackled one of his own men, knocking the rifle away. The second man turned his aim again. Margaret clutched James's coat. James, Samuel, what do we do? James steadied her trembling hands. We get you inside, he said. Now. He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the porch steps. But Margaret stopped, twisting free. No, she cried. We can't leave Samuel. Then she saw two men dragging Samuel by the arms toward the cabin steps, trying to get him out of the line of fire. Caleb? Levi? No, they were strangers. James shouted, Who are you? Neighbors, one yelled back. We saw flames from our window and came running. The three men laid Samuel gently near the porch. Samuel groaned in agony. Margaret stumbled to him. Samuel, Samuel, keep your eyes open. His eyes fluttered. I'm here. James crouched beside them, scanning the ridge. The Ridgemen were reloading their rifles. Margaret, inside now. She shook her head violently. I'm not leaving either of you out here. James grasped her shoulders firmly, eyes burning. Margaret, you're the reason we're still fighting. Crow caught James's eye and nodded sharply toward the cabin. I'll hold them off, he shouted. Get her inside. James hesitated. Crow, I owe it to my brother. Crow roared. He grabbed the fallen rifle and charged the ridge, firing into the air to draw their attention. The two ridge men turned on him. Crow shouted over his shoulder, "G.O." James lifted Samuel with the help of the neighbors, dragging him toward the door. Margaret hurried beside them, one hand under Samuel's head. "Easy, easy, Samuel. Stay awake. Stay with us." Samuel's voice wavered, ghostly thin. "Margaret, yes? I never stopped watching over you." Tears spilled from her eyes. "I know," she whispered. "And I'm so angry, but I'm glad you lived. I'm glad you're here." His lips trembled in a faint smile. James looked from Samuel to Margaret, expression caught between heartbreak and duty. The snow around them sparkled faintly in the last strands of daylight. Behind them, gunshots cracked. Crow shouted. The ridge men cursed. The battle raged in the blowing snow. But inside Margaret's heart, something else raged: grief, love, regret, and a truth she didn't know how to carry yet. They reached the cabin door. The neighbors forced it open, clearing the doorway. James shouted, "Lay him on the bed, hurry." They lowered Samuel onto Margaret's quilt-covered mattress. His breath came shallow, uneven. Margaret knelt at his side, holding his hand with both of hers. "Samuel, please fight." His lips parted. "I'm tired, Maggie." No one had called her Maggie in decades. It broke her. James stood by the doorway, watching them both, torn between stepping closer and stepping back. Then Samuel's eyes opened one last time, focused not on Margaret, but on James. "Whitford." James leaned down. "Yes." Samuel's voice cracked. "You love her, don't you?" James froze. Margaret inhaled sharply. James opened his mouth, but no words came. Samuel nodded faintly. "I knew, the moment I saw your face." He coughed, wincing. "I never hated you, James, even if she once did." Margaret turned sharply. "Samuel, please, don't speak." But Samuel lifted a trembling hand, touching her cheek. "You deserve the love I couldn't keep alive in my own heart." Margaret's sob echoed through the room. James clenched the edge of the table, his chest tight, breath uneven. Samuel's voice fell to a whisper. "Take care of her." Margaret grabbed his hand. "Samuel, no, no, don't leave." James reached for her shoulder, steadying her as she shook. But Samuel's hand slipped from her cheek. His eyes drifted shut. His chest stilled. Margaret let out a sound that didn't sound human, a sound torn from the deepest part of her soul. James caught her as she fell forward. Maggie, I'm here." But outside, gunshots thundered closer. Crow's scream echoed through the trees. James lifted his head. The ridge men were coming. Fast, and they were headed straight for the cabin. He whispered urgently, "Margaret, we have to go. Right now." She looked up at him, tears streaking her cheeks. "James, I can't leave him. We'll come back for him," James said, voice breaking. "But if we stay, they'll kill us too." Another bullet smashed through the window. Margaret screamed. James pulled her toward the back door. Behind them, Samuel lay still. Ahead of them, death approached. And outside, a voice roared, "Whitford, the woman. Come out now." Margaret clutched James's coat with trembling fingers. "James, where do we run?" James turned toward the dark forest beyond the cabin. The only place they won't expect, the old mine tunnel. Margaret's eyes widened. "That place is sealed." James's expression hardened. Not completely. He grabbed her hand. "Run." And together, he pulled Margaret into the storm as the ridge men charged the cabin. The snowstorm swallowed the world as soon as James pulled Margaret through the back door and into the dark line of pines. The wind howled sharply, stinging her cheeks and tugging at her wool shawl as she stumbled behind him. Behind them, the cabin windows burst with gunfire, glass shattering, wood splintering, Margaret's life tearing apart with each echo. James didn't stop. His grip on her hand was firm, urgent. "Keep low," he called over the wind. "Don't stray from my side." Margaret's breath came in sharp, painful bursts. Her heart ached with every step. Samuel was dead. Her husband, long gone, now returned, and lost again within minutes. And she had not even held him long enough to say goodbye. The storm blurred her vision, but tears blurred it more. James, Samuel. Her voice cracked painfully. We can't just leave him. We will return, James said, breath steaming in the icy air. But if we stay now, they will kill you, and I will not let that happen. Margaret stumbled, grief crashing into her again. I never thought, never imagined, he was alive. James slowed, turning to steady her by the shoulders. His eyes, red from cold, fierce with worry, locked onto hers. I know, he whispered, and I know what this is doing to you. But I swear on my life, I won't let you die here. Another burst of gunfire snapped through the trees. Shouts followed. They're heading toward the back trail. Whitford went this way. Find the woman. Margaret flinched violently. James pulled her close. We move. Now. He guided her deeper into the forest, through the thick snow and dead branches, until the trees swallowed all light but the flicker of the dying day. They climbed a steep ridge, the snow crunching underfoot. Margaret's legs burned. Her lungs felt tight. James, where's this mine? Just ahead, he said. Old sulfur tunnel from the 40s. They sealed the main entrance, but I know another way in. You've been there before? James hesitated. Only a heartbeat, but enough for Margaret to notice. Yes, he said finally. Her breath caught at the undertone in his voice. James, why did you know a way into an abandoned mine? He didn't answer. Before she could press him, a lantern's glow flickered on the ridge to their right. James swore under his breath. They're spreading out, faster than I expected. He grabbed her hand again and pulled her through a narrow passage between two boulders, branches scraping against their coats. Then the ground dipped, and before them, half buried under snow and vines, sat a fallen wooden support beam and a dark opening beneath it, just tall enough to crawl through. Margaret's heart dropped. That tunnel, she whispered. James nodded. It's the only way they won't follow. A rifle cracked again, this time closer. Down you go, James said urgently. He crouched first, cleared the fallen branches, and slid into the darkness. Margaret hesitated, fear trembling through her. What if it collapses? It won't. How do you know? James turned, meeting her frightened gaze with a soft, heartbreaking expression. Because I hid here once, he whispered. Margaret's breath caught. When? She asked. James didn't look away. 40 years ago. The night I left town. The world seemed to tilt. The night I rejected you, she breathed. James nodded slowly. Gunshots echoed again, closer now, harder, footsteps crunching through the forest. Margaret inside. Please. With her heart pounding so loud she could barely hear her own thoughts, Margaret crawled inside. The tunnel enveloped them in cold darkness. James followed behind her, pulling loose branches across the entrance. The outside world disappeared, covered by snow, wood, and quiet. Only their shallow breaths and the dripping of water filled the darkness. James lit a small tinderbox, revealing the cramped tunnel, dirt walls, wooden beams, the smell of old earth and dust. The flickering flame cast trembling shadows across Margaret's face. She leaned back, chest rising and falling rapidly. Why? She whispered. Why did you come here after I rejected you? James exhaled slowly and sat across from her, knees nearly touching hers. Because I didn't want anyone to see me break. Margaret's eyes filled with tears instantly. James, he looked down, voice heavy with old grief. I was angry at myself, not you. I blame me for coming to you too soon. Too young. Too hopeful. Margaret's throat tightened. You were so gentle back then, she whispered. You don't know how many nights I wondered if I'd made the right choice. James's gaze lifted, pained. Did you? Margaret swallowed hard. I married Samuel. And for many years, I believed I did. Silence. The lantern flickered against the dirt walls, illuminating the lines on her face. Lines carved by loss and hard winters and choices she could never undo. But, she whispered shakily when he died, I began to dream of the life I never lived. The life where I said yes. James's breath caught. Margaret looked at him with trembling uncertainty. But now, Now everything is wrong. He wasn't dead. I'm mourned a man living in shadows. And you return now. She covered her face. I don't know what to feel, James. James knelt forward, reaching gently for her hands. Maggie, he breathed, using the name she hadn't heard since her youth. She lifted her eyes. He continued, voice low and trembling. I didn't come to take you from him. I didn't come for revenge. I came because I heard you were alone, and I could not stand the thought of leaving our story unfinished. Margaret whispered, Our story? James nodded. It never ended, Maggie. It only paused. Before she could respond, muffled voices echoed faintly from above. Tracks head this way. Check the ridge. They can't have gone far. Margaret's heart seized. James put a finger to her lips. Quiet. They held still as footsteps crunched overhead. Loose dirt rained down onto Margaret's coat. James shielded her as beams of lanterns swept across the ground above. A man's voice growled. Search deeper. Whitford's slippery. Another replied. The woman too. She knows the truth now. James stiffened. Margaret felt panic rise in her chest. But after long minutes, the footsteps faded. James waited. When silence returned, he exhaled softly. We have some time. Not much. Margaret leaned her head against the tunnel wall. James, he turned toward her. She stared at him. Really stared. The man she once rejected, who had lived a lifetime carrying the weight of her absence. What truth, she whispered, did I supposedly learn that makes them want me dead? James's eyes darkened. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Maggie, there's something else you don't know. Margaret tensed. About Samuel? James shook his head. No, about your family. My family, she whispered. James nodded. And why I truly left town after you said no. Margaret's breath stopped. What does my family have to do with you leaving? James hesitated, pain flickering across his features. You were never meant to know, he whispered. Your father made sure of it. Margaret's eyes widened. My father? James, my father died 20 years ago. James swallowed. I know, but the power he had, the threats he made, the truth he hid, lasted long after. Margaret's voice trembled. James, tell me. He finally met her eyes, full of old wounds. Your father came to me the day after you refused my proposal. He paused. Margaret's breath trembled. He told me. James's voice broke. If I ever came near you again, he'd send men to find me. Margaret gasped, hand flying her mouth. My father said. That to you? What? James closed his eyes. Because, he paused, voice cracking under the weight of the truth. I knew his secret. Margaret stared. What secret? James leaned closer, whispering the truth that would change everything. Your father was the reason Samuel disappeared. Margaret's heart stopped. James's voice trembled. And if you'd married me, he said what happened to me too. Margaret recoiled, breath shattered. No, that can't be. James reached for her hands. But it's the truth, Maggie. The truth he died with. The tunnel fell into a stunned silence. Margaret covered her face, sobbing quietly. Her entire life, her marriage, her grief, her guilt, her anger, her choices, twisted by a secret she never knew. She lifted her head, voice fragile. James, we have to get out of here. We have to. Before she finished, the ground above them rumbled. Snow fell harder into the tunnel. James grabbed her. No, move back. The hillside cracked. A beam snapped, and the tunnel entrance collapsed in a roar of snow, dirt, and wood. The light went out. Margaret screamed as the tunnel filled with darkness. James reached blindly for her hand. Margaret, don't let go. The world collapsed in a thunder of breaking wood and falling snow. Cold earth slammed around them as the entrance of the tunnel caved in, plunging Margaret and James into a suffocating darkness so thick it swallowed breath, sound, and light. Margaret screamed, her voice muffled by the choking dust. James! His hand found hers in the dark, strong, desperate, trembling. I've got you, he gasped. Don't let go. The tunnel shook one last time, then fell still. Dripping water echoed down the narrow passage. Snow sifted from the cracks above. The air grew sharp with the scent of damp earth and panic. Margaret pressed her forehead against James's hand. "I can't breathe." "You can," he whispered, pulling her closer. "Stay with me." Her breath trembled. She wasn't afraid of the dark. She'd lived through years of it after Samuel died. She wasn't afraid of death. She'd welcomed it some nights, when the loneliness grew too heavy. But she was afraid now, because in this darkness, she realized she did not want to die. Not when James had just come back into her life. Not when Samuel's truth still lay heavy and unresolved. Not when so much had been stolen from her by time and lies. James squeezed her hand again. "We're not trapped," he said, trying to steady his voice. "I know another way." Margaret blinked through the dark. "You do?" He nodded. "I told you. I hid here once. Not in this tunnel, but in the one deeper in." Margaret swallowed. "Deeper in? But there's no light, James. How will we find it?" James raised the tinderbox he'd shielded with his coat during the collapse. Miraculously, the flint and charcloth remained dry enough. He struck it. A tiny spark, then a trembling flame. Warm, flickering firelight stretched across the dirt walls, revealing Margaret's tear-marked face and James's soot-covered skin. Margaret inhaled sharply. "Thank God." James cupped her cheek gently. "You're alive," he whispered. "That's all that matters." Her heart tightened. "James, I learned so much tonight. Too much. About Samuel, about you, about my father." Her voice cracked. "I feel like pieces of my life have been stolen from me." James brushed dirt from her shawl, his touch tender. "They were," he said softly. "But what's left is still yours." A lump rose in her throat. "What's left feels broken." James shook his head, eyes glistening. "No, Magye. Not broken. Waiting." The silence between them warmed. Then James lifted the tinderbox flame higher. The small light revealed a narrow side passage. "This way," he said. "It connects to the old drainage shaft. We can climb out." Margaret nodded, feeling strength return to her limbs. They crawled through the tight passage. James kept the flame ahead of them, shielding it with his palm from falling dirt. Every few feet, the mountain groaned above them, but held. They reached the drainage shaft, a vertical wooden beam tunnel leading upward into darkness. Margaret stared at it. We climb." James nodded. "I'll go first. I'll pull you up." She shook her head fiercely. "No, you're older than me, James, and stronger than you admit. But I'm not helpless." She lifted her chin. "I'll climb beside you." James's eyes softened. "Just like we should have done 40 years ago." They climbed. Slow, careful, hands gripping cold wood, breaths fogging the air. Halfway up, Margaret's foot slipped. James grabbed her waist, steadying her. "I've got you," he whispered again. Her voice shook. "I know." Near the top, a faint golden glow seeped through cracks in the old wood. James exhaled. "That's daylight." Margaret felt warmth swell in her chest. Light, life, hope. They reached the top. James pushed against the weak planks, and snow tumbled inward as the exit broke open. Fresh, cold morning air rushed into the shaft. James climbed out first, then reached down and pulled Margaret into the open world. She gasped. The storm had passed. The mountains glowed with the soft light of dawn. Snow shimmered like powdered silver. Smoke drifted from distant chimneys in Maple Hollow. They had survived. Margaret fell to her knees, tears freezing on her cheeks. James knelt beside her. "You're safe now," he whispered. She leaned into him, allowing herself to tremble in his arms. For a moment, they said nothing. There were no words big enough. Then footsteps. James tensed, standing quickly. He shielded Margaret with his body. A figure stepped from behind a pine tree, lantern held low, hands raised in peace. Elias Crow. Margaret's breath hitched. Crow looked older than he had hours ago, grief-lined, exhausted, shaken by the truth he had learned. "I ain't here to harm you," he said quietly. James stayed tense. "Why are you here?" Crow looked at Margaret with an expression almost ashamed. "I saw the tunnel collapse," he said. "Didn't think either of you would make it." He lowered the lantern. "The Ridge men, they're gone. I told them the truth about my brother. About Samuel. About everything." Margaret's eyes widened. "And they believed you?" Crow nodded. They left the mountain. Won't trouble you again. James exhaled slowly, but didn't lower his guard. Crow looked at Margaret. I'm sorry for the pain my anger caused, and for your loss. He hesitated. And I reckon Samuel died savant you. Margaret pressed a hand to her heart. He did. Crow swallowed, nodding once. Then he turned to James. Whitford, you and I ain't friends. But today we ain't enemies either. He extended a hand. Take care of her. James hesitated, then shook his hand firmly. Crow tapped his hat, turned, and vanished into the snowy trees. Silence returned. Margaret stood slowly. James stepped close, worry filling his eyes. Maggie, are you all right? She looked at him, really looked at him. This man who had loved her since youth, who had been forced from her life by threat and fear, who returned not for revenge, but for closure and truth, who had protected her every step of this night. Warm tears slipped down her cheeks. James, she whispered, voice shaking. I don't know what my life becomes from here. Everything I believed, everything I built, it's all been overturned. James touched her hand gently. Then let me help you build something new. Her lips trembled. After all these years, do you still want that? James swallowed hard, his voice raw. I never stopped wanting it. The morning sun broke over the ridge, bathing them in soft golden light. Margaret stepped close, touching his cheek with trembling fingers. I don't know how to love again, she whispered, but I want to try. James took her hands in his. Then we try together. The light warmed their faces. The wind softened. The mountains gleamed with the promise of a new beginning. Margaret exhaled, letting her grief dissolve into the cold morning air. For the first time in decades, she felt young. She felt seen. She felt alive. She whispered, James, will you walk home with me? He smiled, gentle, grateful, forever hers. I'd walk 1,000 miles with you. And together, hand in hand, two souls reunited after a lifetime apart, they walked down the snow-covered slope toward the warmth of a new life. A second chance at love. At 65, when she least expected it. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Tales from the Old West, where every tale brings warmth, wisdom, and the beauty of a life well lived.